Hello friend, welcome to the Java project. This is the continuation of our previous video where we discuss about how we can configure the multiple database with the Spring Boot. Now we will see how we can do with using our custom annotation and easily we can do. So while doing backend development, a very common scenario that we face is to enable multiple data source to be connected to a single services. So this may either be a read replicas or completely different database. Well, you go through the internet, you will find multiple way to handle this problem, and I also discuss, and you can see my previous video. I will provide the link in the description section, and in the I button also you can see that link. So let's suppose, for example, creating a multiple data source, being an entity manager, etc. But all these methods require a lot of maintenance and boilerplate code every time we need to introduce a new database, right? So lastly we discussed that this college and student, their configuration, we do that. No worry, if you don't know about that, you can check out my video. So there you can see what is the purpose of doing that. So now that we understand the problem, let's look at how we are going to tackle this with our annotation approach this time. So in order to make this happen, we will be using two concepts. One is the abstract routing data source provided by the Spring framework, and by implementing this component you have to configure two key things. First one is a map which has all your data source. Then second one is a thread local variable lookup key, which will use to identify the data source to be used in the runtime. So after we implement abstract routing data source, then we need to create our custom annotation. After we implement our annotation, we will be using AOP. AOP is abstract oriented programming to switch between our database dynamically by updating the lookup key for our implemented abstract routing data source class. So before moving to our implementation, it is important to understand about the AOP and how it enables us to do this magic of switching between multiple data sources dynamically with a single request. So generally, AOP is a programming paradigm that aims to increase modularity by allowing the separation of cross-cutting concern. It does this by adding additional behavior to existing code without modifying the code itself. In our implementation, AOP allows us to get rid of all the boilerplate code and make our cross-cutting concern. In our case, it is the switching between database modularized into one component in the application. So AOP allow us to specify a point cut, in our case the custom annotation we create. After we specify our point cut, we have to implement our advices. So what is the advices? So advice is the actual action we need to perform on this point cut. In our case, this is the updating our thread local variable, which is the lookup key for our databases. We will be implementing two types of advices. They are before and after. So before is which we will be executed before the method execution. This will get the value of annotation passed and update the lookup key for the database switching. And the after is which will be executed after the method execution. This will be setting the default lookup key after the method is executed, right? So as we got a glimpse of power in aspect oriented programming, or we can say AOP, we can jump into the implementation. So as you can see, we will use the same project, and let me remove this configuration classes we don't need here. Then the rest of things we don't need to do, but just I will brief you what we did here. So first one is a pom.xml, where we use the Spring Boot starter data JPA, Spring Boot starter web, then MySQL connector Java, then project Lombok. We use these four dependencies. Then we created the college entity and college repository. Nothing fancy is here, so don't worry about that. I will provide the GitHub link, you can check out that link. And same we do for the student and entity and repository. Now we are good to go with the implementation part, and I also provide you the schema.sql, so you can also check out this DB file. So now after this thing, let's define our property, which we already did previously. So here you will see the student database credential is this and college database credential is this. I will prefer you to check out my previous video over the multiple data source, where you will see about what we did in this project. So currently you will see the student credential is denoted with the student and college is denoted with the college. So this is our naming convention is here. Now next, let's create our abstract routing data source implementation, which we discussed earlier. So here we have to create a one class implementation inside this configuration package. So let me create one class, and I will write here abstract routing, change it, routing data source IMPL, because this is the implementation where we will extend abstract routing data source. So when I will, so here we implemented the abstract routing data source, and now we have to override one method, implement method, and here you will see there is a determine current lookup key that we have to override here. So I will override it. Now the next thing you will see that we have to create a thread local variable to store the database key. So let me create one variable here. So it should be private static final, and this should be thread local. If you want me to create a separate video over the thread local, what is a thread local and what is the purpose of thread local, so that I will provide you the separate video. But you have to do one thing, you have to comment me you want this video, so I will do that for you. So thread local, and pass the string here, then let me give the name database name and is equal to new thread local. Right, now we created that, and in the determine current lookup key, let me return the value here. But before creating, so this is what we will updating with our annotation to determine which data source to use. And here let me provide the database name dot get. So this configuration is not completed till yet. We have to do, we will initialize this class and creating a bean in our configuration class. So this class has provided us with some key method we use here in setting the default data source and to set the data source as well. So for doing that, let me create a constructor for there. So constructor we have to create, so public abstract routing data source IMPL, and in the parameter let me maximize this, and in the parameter we have to pass two parameters. First one is a data source, so data source, and give some name. So let me give the default target data source. Right, then the next parameter which we have to pass, this one is a map of object. So map, and here we have to provide object comma object, and let me import the package and provide some name like target data sources. Give the name small s, so data sources, right? Then inside it we have to set our data source, target data source and data sources. So super dot, here you will see set data default target data source and target data sources. So firstly default target data source, and default target data source is default target data source, right? The next thing is to provide the super dot set target data sources. So target data sources. Then the next thing we have to set our property set. So super dot after property sets. Okay, then after the first thing, constructor is completed. Now the other thing which we have to do is to set the database and get the database and remove the database. These three things we have to create, these three methods we have to create it now. So public static void, so first one is the set database name, then inside this one, so here we have to return the database name dot get. So sorry, this one is the set, right? So it should be a parameterized a string key, and here I have to set and pass the key. Okay, same like it should be like that. Okay, now the next thing which we have to do for the get, so public static string and get data base name, and here it should be a blank, and here just we have to return database name dot get. So other thing is the remove. So for this thing, create another method, public void or public static void remove database name, and here database name dot remove. So this configuration is done, and now we have to create our configuration class. So in the configuration class we have to initialize our previously created abstract routing data source IMPL by passing the generated data source map by the get target data source method and our default database preferences. So let me create one configuration. So the class name, let me give a dynamic data source router. So dynamic database router. So this one is the configuration class. So let me provide the configuration here, and as I'll show you in my previous video, we use the enable JP repository, so that also I will do here. So enable JP repository and provide the base package. So here the base package I will provide this one, youtube.java puzzle. So now let me create a bean here. So first bean, so denoted as a bean, and it should be a primary, Then like here we just use public abstract data source IMPL, abstract routing data source IMPL, and create a data source. Then here inside it we have to create an object of map. Then we will just return that. So let me create. So we added here the data source detail, and one more thing I have to do here to change the scope, because by default in this Spring Boot the scope is a singleton, and in this case we need a prototype. So scope, and here we have to just provide the prototype. So after this you will see the ID is complaining like this get data source is not here. So let me create a method here. So this data source, now this is responsible to load the database name to the list from application.property file. So here, so now in this get data source method we just add the property of the environment. We just add the property prefix where we use the spring.dataSource dot, and rest of thing we are getting from this application.property file. Then we add the environment, and this environment is coming from this spring framework.core.environment property resolver. So then we just set our data source with the following details: our driver name, our URL, our username, and our password, which is coming from our property file. So that we did here. Then we set our target data source with the name. Then we have to, the next thing we have to provide the entity manager. So for that thing we just have to do that. We have to provide the entity manager, and scope is also should be prototype. So this is the configuration class where we denoted with the configuration annotation. Then we provide the enable JPA repository, and in the enable JPA repository annotation we provide the base package, which is a youtube.java.puzzle. Then we add one final string, which is a property prefix where we provide the spring.dataSource dot, then other thing we will add here. So that's why we create the final here. Then we provided Spring Framework environment. Then first thing is to provide the data source by using the abstract routing data source IMPL, which we created earlier. So that class we will do that, and then after we create our data source we have to provide the target data source where we will get the property from the spring.dataname.list, which you will see in the application.property. Here is the list of the database name, student, and college. In future if we want to add another database, so what we have to do in the application.property, we have to add inside the comma, and we can provide another database like employee, and then we have to just use that, like just provide and remove student with the employee, right? This is the only thing you have to do with the application.property, and the rest of thing will be do automatically. So this is the advantage of this example. We will see how we will do that. So let me remove that employee, and in this get data source it just return the map of object, and here we just provide the data source where we set the driver class name, URL, username, and password. Then we will set the DB name and data source we return there. So this is the data source we created. Then we have to create the entity manager, and whatever the name of the bean we have to pass here, that we have to provide in the entity manager factory graph here. So I think I'm clear here. So now this time is to create our custom annotation, and this is a very interesting part for you. So let me create annotation here, Inside the configuration I will create the annotation. So here we will we use the target element type as a method, since this annotation will be used in the method level to switch between the database. So let me create one annotation. So new Java class, select the annotation and provide the name. So I will just give the name is a switch data source. Then it will be started with the @interface. Then we have to provide some target and retention here. So let me add the target first. So target, and inside the target we have to provide what type of annotation, where the annotation will be used. So in our case it is a method level, so it should be element type and element type dot method. Then after we have to provide the retention. So @retention, and here we have to provide the retention policy. So retention policy, you will see there is three type of retention policy. First one is a class, source and runtime. So in our case we need to require the runtime, so we provide it here. Then we have to give some default value or whatever we will pass inside this parameter of this annotation, that is the value. So string value, and the default I will provide is a blank, nothing is there. Oh sorry, nothing is there. So our annotation is done. Now create an as aspect. So we are using the AOP here because we will apply point cut to our annotation through our aspect. So we will changing the lookup key of abstract routing data source, and after the point cut we will be restoring the database to default, right? So let me create one aspect inside this configuration. So the name is a data source aspect, data source aspect, and because this is an aspect, so I have to give the annotation as an aspect, and we have to decorate with the component also, so our Spring Boot also know that. Then after we have to provide the order annotation and give the -10 here. So after that let me add some logger also, so we can see everything in the local when logger, sorry, when we will switching our data sources. So let me create one logger. So private final logger is equal to logger factory, logger factory dot get logger and get class. So our logger is set now. Let me see what is the error. Okay, SLF4J. So yeah, because I'm using the SLF4J, so both should be the SLF4J. Then after we have to define where the join point need to be applied. So for this thing we have to use the point cut annotation, and in the parameter we have to provide the whole path of the annotation. So this is the switching data source and it is from the configuration. So let me provide the whole path. So this is the package name, then dot switch data source that we provided here. And then let me create a normal public void annotation point cut. So I will just leave it blank. The next thing we have to we have to call when this method will call. So before we have to do something and after we have to do something. So in the before we have to set the lookup key using the annotation passed value, whatever the value we will pass, like student or college in our case. So that annotation we will pass, so we will do some we have to perform something, means we have to set the lookup key according to whatever the value is passing from the annotation. So for this thing we have to use a before, and inside the before we have to provide the point cut. So in our case this is our point cut, annotation point cut. So let me copy this and provide inside the parameter. Then we have to write our code here, public void before, and inside this we have to provide the joint cut, not joint cut, it's a joint point, sorry, joint not T, joint point, sorry for mistaken, joint point. Then here we have to provide the method signature first, then according to the method signature we will get the method, then we will use the switch data source. So there we use the method signature from the reflection and get the signature there, then from the signature we will get the method. So when we receive the method we will call the get annotation. Then if annotation is not on, means some value is there, then we will call this abstract routing data source IMPL, which we implemented, and then we set our database and whatever the value we are getting, so that we just set. So by using this our database name will be set there, and then after setting this, now after you, then it will call the point cut, and then after annotation we have to use here, and it will the restore to the default data source after execution of the method. So for that thing we will use the after annotation, and inside the after annotation we have to provide the same annotation point cut there, and here we have to just public void after, and here also we will use the join point and let me, so here we will after using that we will just remove the database. So for that thing we just use if null is not equal to abstract impl dot get database, means the database name should not be null. In that case we just remove that. So abstract routing impl dot remove database name. So now that everything is set, what remain is to create our, so now that everything is set, now we have to create our service and controller layer to extract the data from the data sources. So our entity and the response is already done. What the remaining thing is create a service. So key thing to notice here is that we have to use our custom built annotation, which is a switch data source to switch between the student and college. So let me create a service, but before creating a service let me create one package. So package, sorry, not package info, let me remove that. Okay, so let me create one package which name should be service, and inside the service let me create one class, and let me give the service name is a test service. Okay, now in because this is a service, so let me annotate it with the service here, and inside the service let me auto wire the repository of the college and auto wire, and here college repository, then let me auto wire the student also, so student repository and student repository. Then let me get the list of our college and list of our student. So here we use the list of our college, list of our student by using the annotation switch data source, and inside the value we provide the college and student. So after that let me create a controller. Okay, so we already have the controller, so we will use the same controller, combine controller. Let me add the I don't need this repository here because we already create our service class, so let me remove that and use the auto wire with our test service, then service here, then let me get this, let me remove here, and service dot get all college, and let me remove that, service dot get all student. So now everything is set. Now we have to run the program and see the output. So just go inside the main method and let me run the program. So now this run in 8088. So let me run the here you will see the student details is here, college is here. After getting that, you will, in this video we covered the multiple concepts like aspect oriented programming, then creating a custom annotation, how to utilize abstract routing data source for dynamic switching of data source. So utilizing these points, we created a cool annotation to dynamically switch between the data source easily. And as mentioned in the introduction, as well as this will remove large amount of boilerplate code and make plugging new data source easier as well. So you can configure any number of database and switch between them using the implementation. Source code is I will provide the GitHub link of this code in the description section. You can check out that. So thank you for watching and stay tuned to subscribe my video and press the notification bell so you will not miss my next video. Thank you.